Hello everybody and welcome to the Radiator Arms, the podcast almost certainly guaranteed to end at least one of our political careers. This week, the potentially controversial question, are car guys their own worst enemy?
No.
Yes. Will, tiebreaker?
Maybe.
Join us next week on the Radiator Arms, every Monday morning at 7 o'clock. First on YouTube, then on Apple, Amazon, and Spotify. All right, so let's do the slightly longer version. We've done the TLDR, or TLDL, I think it would be, wouldn't it? Yeah. Too long didn't listen for anybody that's over 21 and currently either watching or listening. And if you are watching, hello. And if you're listening, hello. To introduce ourselves, in case for some reason this is the first episode you're listening to, I am James, aka JayEmm. To my right, we have the man in the cans, Will the Plank.
Hello.
And to my left, the ever amazing and wondrous Ant from Sports and Touring and JayEmm and Friends.
That would be me.
Now, this week, gentlemen, before we get started, it's all changed in some of the fleets. The Maestro's currently up for sale, and we think we might have a buyer. Is that right?
That is right. Currently, on day of filming, it is Tuesday the 10th of June, and over the weekend, there is somebody who is looking to purchase it, and they seem very keen. Ooh. So, yeah, it's leaving the fleet. It's an interesting feeling, that, because we both on Sunday we filmed videos on that respectively. You've got one going up on JayEmm on Cars, and I've got one that I've done for JayEmm and Friends, where I'm just kind of saying goodbye to the car, talking a little bit about it, what it meant to me, but also kind of excited for its new chapter in many ways.
How long have you had that car for now?
So I got it at the end of November 2022,
and it was a legitimate quote-unquote barn find, wasn't it?
It was. It absolutely was. It hadn't ran in 19 years.
Wow.
I think it was something along those lines. Certainly hadn't been taxed since then. And yeah, when I got it, it was filthy. It had a smashed out window. Bits of trim had been ripped off by little children deciding they'd try and start a car that had been sat for at least 10, 15 years at that point to try and nick it. I don't know how they ever thought that would happen, but there you go. So it needed a little bit of love to get it back up and going. But love it had, and I've had a lot of enjoyment out of it. But obviously, for those who haven't seen the video on JayEmm on Cars, or the podcast where we talked about it, I have a Mercedes W124 or C124 Coupe that was kindly gifted to me by James, and Ant was a co-conspirator of that as well. And so that is one of the reasons the Maestro has gone so soon. I wasn't planning to get rid of it this year. It was going to be next year. But with the way things worked out, I can't run three cars, really. It's quite expensive. And also, I haven't got into it once since I got the Mercedes, so I think that says everything.
Though it was a bit touch and go with the Golf the other day as well, wasn't it?
Basically, for a little while now, I was looking at the expansion tank thinking, the level of that is rising. Why is the level of the expansion tank rising? And then I'd undo the cap and it would suddenly all go back down. I was like, this is very strange, but it wasn't overheating or doing anything like that. But a couple of days ago, I drove from my unit to my local town, and I noticed by the time I was getting close to a supermarket car park that the temperature was three ways up the scale. And I was thinking, oh, this isn't right. What's happened here? This isn't right. And as I pulled up in the car park and parked, what happened then was the expansion tank shot out at least a good couple of litres of coolant. And I thought, oh dear, it's cooked its head gasket again. Or something else has gone wrong. Because what I noticed was there was no coolant coming back through the return line into the expansion tank. Now, that is a line which goes from the side of the cylinder head all the way to the expansion tank and basically helps circulate the kind of like the overflow coolant and things like that, and helps pressure move, air, yada, yada, yada. So I thought, oh dear, the water pump's gone. I bought this metal impeller water pump and I thought, I don't know what's happened there. Maybe it's failed. Maybe something's happened. And I was like, I think it's time to throw this thing in the bin. Like, if it had needed to like potentially have a new cam belt and even potentially a head gasket again where it's potentially cooking itself, I was like, that's it. This car is done. And I have also spent some more money on it recently, and we're going to let this secret. It's not much of a secret actually, because a few people cottoned on in the Merc reveal video. It's now got a Bora front end. Which has been a bit divisive between you two, I think, as well. What have your thoughts been on the Bora front end?
Mine, I'm actually, I would not have done it personally.
Okay.
But then I probably wouldn't have had a Golf Estate either.
There is that. James?
Yeah, it's really, really niche scene kit. Like, had you done it and not told me, I would not have noticed. And I still, to be honest, don't really understand what a Bora even is. And I definitely don't understand why you'd want to put the front of one onto your Golf, or how this is in some way a good thing. Honestly, it's way too scene kid for me. Honestly, I am officially taking out my old man card on this one.
So there's only one circumstance in which I think I can imagine it would be worth doing that. And that is if there was body damage on the front, like dinks and paint scratches and whatever, and you found a kit of the front wings and bumper that were in exceptionally good condition from a breaker's yard for cheap, way cheaper than you could have got either what you have repaired or for the same parts, then yeah, sure, do it. I mean, why not? But yeah.
Choosing to replace a perfectly acceptable, choosing to replace your front end just seemed a bit daft. The only circumstance that springs to mind where I can think a front end swap is a generally good thing or a cool thing to do is the Nissan Stagia.
Yes, with the R34 front end.
Yeah. So you put the front end of a Skyline on it. It is underneath effectively the same car. And then you have sort of an R34 estate, which is really cool. But when I think cool, I don't think VW Bora.
What about when people take the 12C and put the 650S front end on it?
Well, McLaren did that.
I know, but when people do it... So
I'd actually do the opposite. Legitimately, I would have a 650 and I would put a 12C front on it.
I think the 12C front end is just aged so well.
No, it really has.
I really want one still.
Drove one the other day, a really, really early one, and they look so good. And it perfectly demonstrates what is wrong with modern supercar design, which is that cars have gotten way too complicated. I was looking this morning at listings for Maestros, just because we were talking about, you selling the car and what's it actually worth and all that sort of stuff. And I've always had a bit of a weakness, I don't know why, for the MG Maestro Turbo. And there's a couple up for sale at the minute. One's a limited edition British Racing Green one, which is really cool with the red graphics and stuff on it and the turbo badging on the side, as was obligatory back in the 80s and 90s. And I think it's just got a good shape to it. And the same goes for the Gallardo, and to maybe a slightly lesser extent the R8. The shape is just inherently right. And then they didn't add too much to it. One of the reasons that I just don't love the look of the Revuelto quite as much as I do, say, the Aventador is because the Aventador is actually a relatively simple shape with some nice detailing, some nice styling elements, particularly the first generation car where it was still very smooth and they had the little rising back pods to keep the whole thing looking nice and clean. Like when I was younger, I loved the idea of wings on stuff and this, that, and the other. But as I've gotten a little bit older, I begin to appreciate those really clean, elegant, sleek designs.
Like a Bora front end.
Yeah, which is just as clean, elegant, and sleek as a Golf front end.
So I think the way to answer why I did it is because I can.
Yeah.
And I wanted to, and it seemed like something to do at the time. A way to spend time. And also a way to make content coming up for the channel.
Yes, yeah. And that's why I'm not going to be complaining about it, because I'm happy to see the content. There was something you were just saying. Gosh, I've actually, as soon as I started talking, it went out of my brain. This is what happens when you get old. Oh, I was going to say that I must be the Benjamin Button of car taste, because the older I get, the more wings and winglets and things that I want on the car. Like, for example, with the Aventador, my favorite of all of them is actually the SVJ. And if my son was watching this, he would be saying to me, nope, SV, you're wrong. The SV is the best looking one. But I love the SVJ because it's got all of the extra
The
winglets on
SV,
it.
I think, is better looking than the SVJ.
I know, but this is my point. Even though probably for most people it's the better looking car, the one I personally prefer is the busier design of the SVJ.
SVJ, see, nobody's even offered me an SVJ to drive. And if somebody did offer me one, I am actually slightly terrified because I look at it and I look at how extreme, particularly the front end is. And there are quite a few roads around here where most stuff will get over it absolutely fine, including supercars and whatnot. Yeah, the Gallardo, the R8, the 430, all that. But the SVJ is extreme. Not only is it low, it's also long as well. And there's a few little bits of road where I'm thinking like, yeah, I'm going to have to creep around this at like 30 mile an hour for fear of destroying the front end. Because I have a vague idea of what Lamborghini parts prices are, and I have no interest in putting my insurance policy to the test for a bumper.
So what you're saying is like the sausage dog of cars, low and long.
Yeah, except imagine the legs were both sort of, one of the set of legs was in the middle, one set of legs was at the back, and then the rest of it is just overhang. That's the problem.
Oh dear. So let's finish the story about my car park escapades.
Mm-hmm.
So what I realised was, as I said, there was no coolant flow. But I did a quick Google, as we all did, while I was waiting for the RAC to come out. And that's a rant for maybe later or another time because they're absolutely useless as far as I'm concerned now, and I'm cancelling my membership. But while I was waiting for that, I read online that it might just be this overflow kind of pipe, which goes back to from the side of the head to the coolant overflow is a metal pipe, and sometimes it gets blocked up with just general smeg and cooling system rubbish. So I figured out that by sucking on the pipe that there was no air movement, and I was like, maybe this is what it is. There's just no flow back.
Well, those hand gestures for those that are watching, they could be a little R-rated, but carry on.
A different means of gesticulating. But hang on, so put my hands behind my back. But what I ended up doing was limping the car home because basically the RAC, all they did when I tried to call them was not put me through to a human, but try and force me to go online and do something on my phone in an area where I had no internet signal at all. And then I spent 20 minutes speaking to a robot who couldn't understand me and just didn't put me through to a human. So I said, do you know what? I'm just going to limp it home. It's cooled down now. And I did the thing where it's only like a 10, 15 minute drive to my unit from where I was. And I started up at every light and every stop. I turned the engine off and then I drove and then I'd stop and then I was coasting, making sure like it was all right, everything like that. And I got it back. And with the help of a little bit of kind of chemical cleaner and my airline, I blew the blockage out, and it's been fine ever since. But yeah, it was one of those things where I'm realising that I think a cooling system overhaul is kind of definitely necessary. And we've spoken about this before. On cars, they get to a certain age and really weird, silly things go wrong that you wouldn't normally expect. And this is a case in point.
When Bangonomics begins to test your patience and your sanity.
Fortunately, I did a mod we spoke about before on the Golf video that we did on the JayEmm and Friends channel, which is where I've made the instrument cluster accurate when it comes to its temperature gauge. Now, most modern cars, the temperature gauge is basically an idiot light. For instance, on the Golf, between 74 degrees and I think about 108 is where it will read center normally. So any kind of temperature range between then, it's at a normal temperature. However, I edited the EEPROM on the cluster so it is accurate. So my temperature gauge actually moves and flows.
You probably saved your car.
I did. I 100% saved my car from doing that. Because I remember when I first had issues with the head gasket and it was overheating, it would suddenly be like middle, all the way up, middle, all the way up. So it was ridiculous.
This is one of these daft things, isn't it, where that shouldn't be something that manufacturers had to do. It reminds me of when Dell, do you know the thing that Dell did which got more complaints than anything else?
What was that?
Most old school computers, you start them and it sounds like a jet landing in your office.
Yes.
They go woo, and then they all calm down. Well, Dell figured out a fairly simple way to just get the fans to start at low speed. So you press the button and it just turns on nicely and quietly. People complained about that more than any other single issue because they no longer knew that the computer was in fact on when they pressed the button. These presumably, and I'm going to make an educated guess as to which country these people were in, these are also the same people that meant the thing had to say, press the return key to then move forward to the next step. Do you remember when you had to do stuff? Do you remember when computers told you it's now safe to turn your computer off?
Yep.
Yes.
There's a lot of stuff we just expect technology to do that, if you remember, actually it didn't 20 years ago. And it says press the return key, which is the enter key for us Europeans or British, because it used to say press any key, and they would get phone calls asking which is the any key.
Oh, goodness.
That was a joke, though. I saw they made that in The Simpsons as well to parody like literal real people who are just.
I mean, they still walk amongst us, these people.
do.
So the Golf is better now, working, happy,
it's
limping on.
It's better, it's happier, it's limping on, and also a big revelation. I'm mostly unmodifying it.
Yeah.
The 18-inch wheels have come off. A set of 16-inch Bora Sport wheels have gone on, so I'm leaning heavily into the Bora theme now. The Audi steering wheel.
You're going to be out there one day with an angle grinder, taking off the rear window, aren't you? Turning it into a saloon. I'm Boraizing the rear grille,
And he's going to have it made up in white with blue stripes, Jesse style from Fast and Furious.
Yeah, we'll get you some fake brakes for it.
Excellent. They are pretty small brakes, so they might as well be fake, but there you go. But it's going back to standard suspension as well. It's got a VW steering wheel now.
Yeah.
And I also have to thank the people at the VW Chop Shop in Ipswich. They are my dealer. They're who keep me poor and keep me in car parts everywhere.
Yeah. Anyway, doesn't Jesse drive a Jetta, or is that?
Actually, no.
It's basically the same thing. In America, the Mark IV estate was the Jetta wagon, and that is where that had the Bora front end on anyway. It's just in America. It's basically making an American estate because I'm an idiot and I can.
So confused. And anything you've been doing the last few weeks?
Yeah, as you mentioned, fleet changes, and you've heard this here first. I am selling my R8 GT.
It's official.
I'm making it official right now.
Unpack the large violin.
Yep.
This is genuinely sad.
No, it's not. It's not sad. It's because, honestly, I never wanted to sell that car. I love it. I also think it's one of those cars that I will look back on and think, why did I do that? But I have a choice. I can ramp up the consultancy work I was doing in the sort of agile software development space and do less YouTube, or I can sell the car so that I can keep doing more YouTube and turn it into something that can pay the bills rather than just currently make a loss and offset some of the bills. So I've pretty much taken a lot of time out of my full-time job, and I'm kind of doing, I suppose, what Ben from Dadcars did, a kind of trading down. So I plan to sell the GT and trade down to something that might be vaguely more sensible, but, sensible in air quotes. And just try and grow JayEmm and Friends and Sports and Touring by focusing on it as close to full time as I possibly can.
That is the politest way I've ever heard anyone say it's your fault.
No, I take full responsibility. I take full responsibility for all my decisions, but I just, I kind of got to a stage in my career where there's certain work that I really enjoy doing in this consultancy space, and there's certain work I don't enjoy doing. And for the most part, YouTube, I just enjoy most of it. Whereas the other work was kind of 50-50.
And I think if there is anything that we ever try and promote here at the Radiator Arms, it's that you should always pursue that which makes you happy.
Yeah.
Provided you're not going to be sacrificing something really quite important, like
or
being able to afford the rent. Plus also, I've been through the process because actually when I started YouTube, I also wound up doing the trading down bit because I started with a really nice brand spanking new Lotus, the one and only new car I've ever bought. But because it took about 3.5 to 4 years for YouTube to earn any money, in that time, I had to sell quite a bit and start replacing it with, ever more affordable cars. And during that process, I actually bought some stuff that maybe I otherwise wouldn't have, which I really, really enjoyed. I mean, the Lotus got sold and turned into an M3 and a 911. The M3 then got sold, and half of the money from that then bought the S2000, and the S2000 is still with me. Albeit by this point, I feel like it's cost me nearly as much as the Lotus did in the first place, which is not ideal. But yeah, there are lots of cool cars out there. Now I'm driving something interesting tomorrow, and I'd like your prediction as to whether I'm going to like it or not.
Okay.
I'm driving a 370Z Roadster.
You'll hate it.
Yeah?
I think so. I mean, I've not driven one.
I've not driven them. They're quite rare. I sort of forget that
rare.
they made them.
I think you'll like it because you've always said that even a crap convertible is still a good time.
That is very, very true. This one's also got the 7-speed flappy paddle box, which
Definitely
I've experienced in a few cars, and it's actually sort of all right. What's going to be interesting to see is whether it's still trying to be a particularly sporty car and whether it's survived it or not, because some cars, you lop the roof off, fine, it's maybe even better. Other cars, you lop the roof off. Maserati 4200, I'm looking at you, and you ruin it. Honestly, I don't know what it is with Maserati. They cannot make a convertible to save their lives.
So the thing with the 370Z, it was always more of a GT car than a sports car. It was kind of like, it's like it didn't really know what it wanted to be. It was sized like a sports car, but behaved more like a GT car. I felt the suspension was too soft. That's why, I mean, I had mine for a while. I planned to change the suspension, but I didn't. And then eventually I got the Nismo version, which I think out of the box is like so much fun, like really, really good. And then of course I ruined it by modifying it and so on. I don't think I ruined it. I think I made it better. But the thing with the convertible, I haven't driven one, but I have driven the automatic. I've just felt the automatic was a bit laggy and a bit not that good. And then the design of the convertible, the Roadster, there's something weird about where the roof kind of is supposed to be that just doesn't look right. The haunches at the back, and then there's this it's been chopped, and it's like, oh, but you thought, well, I'm just not going to design a nice flowy bit here. I'll just leave it looking like it's been cut off with a hacksaw or something. It's just weird.
Yeah, it is rare, I think, that you find a car which looks equally as good as a coupe or as a convertible.
I think a lot of the time it depends on what it was designed to be first.
Well, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
I think the convertible R8 looks better than the coupe R8, as an example, but I think they both look quite good.
Oh, I see. Actually, one car where I've changed my tune on it is the Ferrari 360, which is gorgeous as a coupe. But when you have the Spider with the roof down, it's spectacular. It's aged so well, especially if you get the right front grills on it and everything, because they did do a couple of them. Yeah, lovely thing.
I'm going to change my vote from the beginning, where I said, no, car people are not their own worst enemy. Right now, we are our own worst enemy because we haven't even started talking about that topic, and I think we probably should.
Do you know what? I think in a way we have, because I'm my worst enemy because I keep spending money unnecessarily. So actually, yes, I think I am. So I think that's actually been fairly relevant so far.
Well, I suppose there are a few different ways we could look at this topic, but I know the one that Ant had in mind was pertaining more specifically to the social and public-facing side of carbons, because I think we can all agree that we individually are our own worst enemies, because we will constantly do things that are perhaps financially inadvisable just because we love the thing. I mean, I did a whole video on this recently where I said, look, you know, every time I do a video talking about the fact that one of my Ferraris has cost me money, there'll always be somebody in the comment section go, oh, why did you bother with this blooming Ferrari? So unreliable. You're just wasting money, yada, yada, yada. And that sort of stuff fascinates me because guess what? I never bought into a Ferrari for the notion of saving money or doing something because it seemed sensible or wise. I did it because it was stupid, but because it's also something I've always wanted. And the reason that you want it is because very, very few people actually ever do go for it. And something I think that the market is maybe slowly starting to appreciate now is the fact that, particularly when you're looking at older cars, by which I mean probably anything sort of pre-2000 really, when you're looking at the supercar market, these cars were made in unthinkably small quantities. I mean, the Countach was in production from the 70s until basically the beginning of the 90s, and they shifted 2,000 of them. That's
that
it.
few?
Yeah. You know,
Wow.
they did not make that many of these cars. I mean, the Ferrari 355, for example, was a real big seller. They sold 11,000 of them. You know, and by the standards of that kind of car, that's a lot. But these days, Ferrari are quite cagey as to exactly how many cars they sell. They'll tell you how many cars the company has sold, but not individual models. And the fact is that they're a lot easier to get a hold of. Yes, the prices have gone up, but also there is, more finance. There are a lot of different ways to get into them. For a little while, they're holding their money. So there's a whole bunch of different reasons. But these older cars were just rare. And that's what made them special. These days, I don't think seeing a Ferrari has quite the same appeal to it as it did.
No, finance has made it possible for many more to be on the road.
I think older Ferraris, this is actually what I said before when we first started kind of getting together and talking. I had no real interest in supercars or Ferraris past kind of like the year 2000. And I think that's actually probably why, because you see a lot of them.
Yeah. But yeah, for the topic of the day, I was expecting us to talk more about the car community more broadly.
The scene.
And I'm going to explain why I said I don't think that car people are actually our own worst enemy. Because the people that cause the problems at car events, I don't think of them as car people. Because I think if they genuinely cared about the car community, they wouldn't do what they do. And this is causing us some big problems now. We've been talking about this behind the scenes, where there's an increasing number of councils that are invoking quite draconian court orders that essentially criminalize any gathering of people where anybody does anything that could be considered antisocial or dangerous driving or street racing. And there is very little that you need to do. I mean, literally, the wording of one of the orders that we were looking at, technically speaking, me, James, and my son Damani could go and meet for lunch, park our cars in the car park, and because my son once, and actually currently does, he actually set the lap record at Blyton Park for his class recently and won a sprint event in his RX-8. Would you believe? Because he participates in motor racing, albeit on a racetrack under the appropriate circumstances, the wording of this order would mean that the three of us would be breaking the law.
Yeah.
Explain.
Because the wording is that a gathering of two or more people where one of them intends to participate in motor racing.
Yeah.
It doesn't say intends to participate in motor racing there and then. It just at all.
Yeah.
Now, the spirit of what they were trying to say is there and then, but the wording of the law, of the court order, is at all. And this is going to be a huge problem, I think, for legitimate car meets, like the ones that we do, and the ones that happen at the Cafe de Machines, the Gilt's Cafe, the Motorists, the Gin and Juice, not the Gin and Juice, the whatever the juice.
It's a Snoop Dogg song, isn't it?
No, the Motoring Juice. What's it? I can't remember what it's called now. I went there the other day and I can't remember what it was called. It's going to be an increasing problem because as these precedents for all these court orders are being set, their actual business model could be under threat. And I'll give you an example. A very good friend of mine runs a regular car meet. At the time, it was going weekly, every Tuesday. And there was a saying associated with that in terms of when people would see each other next. And basically, it was always at a pub or a place like that or a hotel with their permission in advance, with people stewarding. And actually, most of the people who were attendees would just voluntarily steward without even needing to be asked or even wearing a high-vis. And it was at a particular pub in Stevenage. And we went there for the first two events. It'd been running for quite some time at other venues. And she just liked to move it around from time to time. And found this really nice pub in Stevenage. And then after the second time we were there, the pub sort of gave her a call and said, look, we can't do this anymore because the police have told us that car meets in Stevenage are illegal. Now, it's a misinterpretation of the court order. The court order for Stevenage is similar to the one in Enfield that we were just talking about, which basically says that a gathering of 2 or more people, if anyone participates in antisocial behaviour, everybody there is essentially arrestable at that point. And they've got all sorts of draconian things like Section 59 orders where they can seize your car and stuff like that, and there is no recourse for that. It's just, in an officer's opinion, your Section 59, there is no recourse via the courts. It's just getting crazy. And the thing that they're trying to address, I think, is the right thing to address. But what they're doing is doing it in completely the wrong way. And I think the car people that we hang out with are car people. But the people that, invade a retail car park and start doing donuts around mini roundabouts and burnouts and revving and popping and banging and all that stuff and upsetting residents at, between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m. or sometimes 1 in the morning, I don't think that's car people. I think that's just hooligans.
Yeah, I agree with you in there, actually. I remember maybe about 10, 12 years ago, I went down to one meet in a retail car park, and I was there for about 20 minutes before I left. I was like, this is just a bunch of idiots doing stupid things. I'm not interested in being plastered with this. And also, I hadn't even had my license a year yet at that point, I don't think. And I was like, the last thing I want to do is get in trouble for being a bystander, be arrested, then question me because there was other cars that looked similar to mine out there as well. And I was like, nope, getting out of here, going. And I totally agree. I don't get the mindset. Why do people want to meet in car parks and be idiots?
Well, I think the meeting in the car parks is fine. It's the being idiots bit.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if it's a public space and there's no reason for you to not be there, like there's no signage that says that the car park is only for use during opening hours of whatever the retail park is or whatever. Like, so what if you go and park up with some friends?
Yeah.
And like there was another one in Stevenage which prompted the court order, which had been going for 10 years without a single incident. And there was one incident and that was it. They ended it. And there was a local KFC there that was making an absolute killing because the space that was used in this retail park was right next to the KFC and actually not that far from the Starbucks. So they were making an absolute killing every single, I can't remember what night it was, I think Thursday evening or something like that, where the whole place was completely empty, but they were still within their opening hours period, and they were packed. Same with that pub that we had that my friend had the meeting in Stevenage. That was on a Tuesday night, one of their quietest nights of the week, where basically they might have 2 or 3 customers, but they just have to be open anyway. And we filled the pub and bought food, and we were putting money into the economy, into that small business. So yeah, I think there's 2 sides to this, but I think the true car enthusiasts who aren't hooligans are basically losing out because of the people who are more interested in creating mayhem than they are in their cars.
Well, my question to you is if you were in charge of all this kind of transport and the policing stuff, how would you deal with it? What would you do? What is your solution?
There's laws that already exist. If somebody, like, it's a bit like, the way I see it is like this. If we all go to the pub for lunch, right, and it's particularly busy, and maybe a certain day where people are celebrating something, and some people get drunk, and 2 people have a fight in that pub, everyone in the pub gets arrested. That's basically what it's saying. It's like, if you go to a pub with the intention of consuming alcohol and food, and any person shows up and starts a fight with any one other person, then you're all arrestable.
I think the problem here is that, and this is not unique to this at all, is that the intent, the wording, and the application of the law are not in sync with each other.
Yeah.
The purpose, I believe, is very well intentioned of this, which is that it is intended to provide a framework for the police to be able to more easily and more expediently deal with the troublemaking element of these meets, and you would think that this is good for all involved, because if you take those from it, then what's left are all the decent people, and then everybody can carry on enjoying themselves. Unfortunately, as my esteemed colleague here has already pointed out, people are now misinterpreting the law and so panicked of it that they're not allowing what is already an established event with a good track record to carry on. Now, in somewhere like Stevenage, I can understand particularly why they're so concerned about this, because one of the meets in question, people were killed at it. And this is not something that the community or any event, anyone, anywhere wants to see. And it didn't help that it was filmed. And so everybody saw what happened. I saw the footage. And to be honest, I'm amazed that more people weren't hurt. And it was one of these things where it's like, do you know what? I don't think anybody was at fault. And simultaneously, I think everybody was at fault, because if you haven't seen it, what happened was you have a road and you have an adjacent road joining it, and a car comes to join the road. There's another car coming down at high speed, but because there were pedestrians everywhere, the car looking to join had absolutely no idea that another vehicle was coming. Of course, wouldn't have been expecting it to come at the speed that it was, wouldn't have been able to know that it was coming until it was far too late, and then basically the car went into the crowd.
Yeah, it was actually, there was a car in front of the speeding car going up the hill. Yeah. And that's why they couldn't see the person who was then about to come out. Also, why the person about to come out couldn't see the speeding car. Yeah. And it wasn't so much to do with the spectators.
It was like a sort of small version of 1980s rally, you know, where you'd get people packed left, right, and centre, and the inevitable happened.
Yeah, I'm not sure that anyone died, but there was certainly some
a couple of people were killed at a Stevenage meet.
Yeah, maybe. Annoyingly, that one was a 350Z. But that meet, Royal Heart Statics, that I've been to that myself before several times, and it was quiet. It was quiet. It was chill. Everyone showed up. They'd have like one of these vans with like slightly too much bass or whatever playing, but because of the location, it was not, and they didn't play it at a huge volume. It was just loud enough really for people in the vicinity to hear it. And it was far enough away from anything residential that it was fine. The police would roll through a couple of times a night. Sometimes they'd park up and walk around and look at the cars. Sometimes they'd be at the top of the hill with what at first I thought was a speed camera, but actually looked more like a decibel meter, which is fair enough. And but yeah, they would really, really chill. It was a chill event. It'd been going for a decade without incident.
Sorry, you are correct. That Stevenage meet, people weren't killed, but there was a couple of other meets over the last few years. Yes, it was very, very seriously hurt, and there were a couple of people that recently have been killed at car meets. We're talking specifically here about Britain as well, where thank God we don't have so many Mustangs.
That too. But also, and not so much takeovers. Like in America, they have these sort of like coordinated takeovers where people block streets, and you know, it looks like a scene out of a, I don't know,
the first Fast and Furious
movie.
Yeah. So I surprise you gents here a little bit. In the very, very early days of the channel, when I just got the Lotus, I was basically trying to get my car and myself as out there as I could, which involved going to every single car show that I could, and that led me to going to a bunch of these car meets, typically on industrial estates of a late evening, and I did that fairly consistently for a best part of a year, I would say. And I made a few observations. Now, one of which is the fact that the people there, many of them had absolutely no self-awareness whatsoever, because what actually got a lot of them shut down wasn't where they were, wasn't the noise that they were making or this, that, and the other. It was the litter that they were leaving, because business owners would, you know, leave on a Friday evening and come back on a Monday, and the place was filled with food wrappers, drink bottles, cigarette ends, and of course there'd be tire tracks everywhere. All of these meets would advertise themselves as quote unquote static, but come about 10:30, there'd be somebody in a BMW compact unpacking a spare set of wheels to stick on the car, and you knew what was about to happen. Now, there was one meet that I decided not to go to, and I think it was when I just stopped going to these things entirely. And for the most part, they were just trying to kid each other, going like, oh, yeah, static meet. Oh, yeah, be sensible, this, that, and the other. And I would have the most hilarious conversations with the people running it, because they go like, oh, mate, yeah, I don't know why the police are hassling us so much. Oh, mate, they give us so much trouble. And I'm like, you see over there's that bloke doing donuts next to the woman that's trying to just get her kid in its pram back to her car. Like, that's why. Like, you haven't even waited for the public to have gone and people are being knobs. That's why. This is your meet. You need to take some responsibility for it. You need to get people at least behaving themselves while Joe Public is around, you know. But yeah, they just couldn't understand what the problem was. But they advertised one meet, and they said, right, sod it, yeah, back to the old days, you know, full drifting, this, that, and the other. And I was like, right, okay, they're not even trying to hide it anymore. And I opted not to go to it. And 3 people got run over by a car, because there's no order, there's no organisation or nothing like that. Now, my take on this is that I think some of these people are car people, but they are also young and a bit stupid. And I think people have always been young and stupid, you know, and they're trying to enjoy their hobby in the way that seems most appropriate to them. And I think a large part of the reason for them doing this stuff where they do it is on account of a general lack of other more suitable places to do it. And I personally believe that it would be far better and more proactive to create spaces, and even in Britain, which is fairly compact, particularly down in England, there will be plenty of places where you can create a space where people can go, play loud music, have a bit of a drift and whatnot in a pretty safe, pretty controlled environment, you know. And I'm sure if you all clubbed together, it wouldn't even necessarily cost that much. The issue is, of course, all the councils are going to say no. Anybody that lives within a 30-mile radius is going to say no. But these people also are going to go, okay, all right, we would like to do it the right way, but you don't want to let us. And because they're young and stupid, they're just going to go and do it somewhere else. And I think this is unfortunate, because a lot of these people might eventually just grow out of it, like a lot of us did. And I feel sorry for a lot of these guys, because I think what part of the problem is that in the day and age of social media, if something goes wrong, somebody will have filmed it on their phone. Like, do not tell me silly shit didn't happen in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, because it definitely did. And honestly, what most of these meets get up to compared to the stuff that happened, particularly back in like the 90s, oh, this is tame. This is like really, really tame, like, you know, nothing compared to the old days of actual proper street racing.
I was going to say, you must have seen the footage of filmed on an old 8mm camcorder, you know, back in the 90s, and people are some of the stuff that had Ford Sierra Codsworth, Escorts XR3s and whatever it is, and all that stuff. You know, all of those things that happened back then. Obviously, social media wasn't around. You relied on maybe 1 or 2 people with a camera that would never get seen, probably out of the local group of people, or just a couple of mates, until 20 years later it goes on the internet.
Yeah. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, particularly for us youngins, I don't think we really fit in that category anymore, but it is the people that came a generation before who I think made it quite so difficult, particularly when it comes to London, Essex. There's a few places in the north as well, I know, where they had a real serious problems. But I spoke to a chap who drove me around Rotherham, telling me about, like, oh yeah, I remember coming down here one day and I came over the crest of this hill and there's 4 cars coming up the hill going the wrong way, all having a race. And when you hear stuff like that, you go, yeah, I can understand why they got really hardcore about it. And the reason that even stuff like Imprezas and Escort Cozzies and that, they're still expensive to insure now, because, of course, they also would get stolen and taken to these events as well. So, you know, half the time someone's doing silly shit, it's not even their own car anyway. So things did really, really get out of hand. But unfortunately, I think because it is, you know, noisy, smelly, polluting and everything else, I don't think people that are not into it are able to see the good in it, the positive in it. And sadly, and this applies to like a whole bunch of different stuff, there just isn't budget in left for the police to come along to stuff and help be there and be proactive members of the society. Like, I love watching those videos. You do see it occasionally in the States where, you know, the police will turn up at like the Santa Pod equivalent, like with a car that they've built. You know, and I've spoken to, you know, motorway officers, and a lot of them are car enthusiasts. And I think they would like to see more ways for people to do this sort of thing legitimately. But we're pretty short on venues here. You've got Santa Pod in the south. You've got Driftland, I think it was called, up in Scotland. Whether it's still open or not, I don't know. But that's not exactly a high density of places for people to go and congregate.
People should check out racetracks as well, because a lot of them actually run drift days. Damani, myself, and one of Damani's friends did the Alton Park Drift Day, and they have a tarmac rally, 2 tarmac rally courses actually. It's one, but they split it into 2 drift circuits, and what they do, it's the tarmac itself is designed to be relatively low grip tarmac anyway, and what they do to keep the noise down is they sort of like dampen the surface as well, so your car gets a bit dirty, to be fair, but it's worth it. And yeah, we went there and we were, you know, drifting all day. I don't remember how much it cost, but it wasn't that much. It was like less than 200 quid if I remember correctly. It wasn't that expensive. I think we worked out that it was like £125 each between me and Damani to share a car. And you can share a car.
I definitely want to do one of those days next year when the S2000's back. Like, yeah.
I'd like to get out on a drift day at some point. Actually, I think that'd be quite fun. I've had sideways experiences, but never properly, really, and where it should be, and most of the time by accident.
Yeah.
Do you know when I tried to do my first drift, and it's one of the most terrifying scenarios you can imagine? It was on my first ever press event, which was for the Toyota Yaris GRMN, and for reasons that none of us ever fathomed, we spent half the event in the Toyota GT86, which had already been out for a little while at that point. And they had Frederick Asbo, world champion drifter, come out. And basically, you hop in the passenger seat with him in this GT86. He goes and does a sort of figure 8 type thing, naturally perfectly executed, gets out and then goes, right, you do it. Like no drift experience whatsoever, other than, you know, a couple of like squirrely car park moments or a bit of fun in the snow. And then it's like, yeah, it's world champion drifter next to you going like, yeah, just do that, will you? And it's like, yeah, and the GT86 is not the easiest thing to drift because it doesn't have a lot of go. So trying to break traction in it is a little bit tricky. Obviously, he makes it look easy, but yeah.
Yeah, a good friend of mine, Jack, had a GT86, and he said he always struggled to get it to go sideways properly.
Yeah, and then when it does go sideways, it goes sideways in quite a big way as well.
Yes. How was that experience? How was your sideways experience?
I did and donut. I did. I actually did one sort of semi-controlled drift I was reasonably happy with, and I would love to do more of it. But yeah, the problem is, like, where do you find the place to go and do this semi-responsibly, or where you're not going to destroy your car?
The nearest racetrack, how far is it away from where would do something like that? Is it Snetterton?
I don't know if Snetterton runs anything like that.
Do they not? That's a shame.
I've not seen it. Santa Pod probably the easiest place to go.
Yeah, I think actually, if I'm not mistaken, brands have a couple of things that they do as well. But there's other things you can do. The Caterham Drift Experience, that's fantastic. I've done that. That's £365 for the day. And that is not in your car. They supply the cars. It's their cars, their wear and tear, their tyres. They give you breakfast. They give you lunch, refreshments throughout the day, instructors, and you get a lot of seat time. Like, I mean, a lot. I mean, to the point where it's like, yeah, okay, I've done a few laps now. I could do with a break kind of seat time.
Radiator Arms trip out next year?
Why not? Let's do it.
Sure. Well, I will speak to the folks at Caterham and see what they say.
Love to do. We do a live podcast from inside a Caterham. We're drifting round a circuit now. It's very fun. It's quite noisy though.
Oh no! You hit the tyre wall.
But yeah, I mean, when you think about the value for money for, like, you know, how much are you going to blow in your tires if you take it down to the local track, then you probably want to do an oil change after you've been thrashing your car all day long. You possibly want to, do the diff oil and things like. There's all these things that you might then have to do in maintenance. Then you've got to get there. There's, it's just by the time you've done it, just go to something like the Catering Drift Experience. There are other drift experience companies. Some I wouldn't recommend. One of them has drift in the name. But there are other experience companies that are out there that are very professionally run, that you can do stuff in 350Zs and Lexus IS somethings. Can't remember what they are now. There's loads of places you can do it, and it's not that expensive. It's all legal. It's all there's safety mechanisms in place to keep people safe.
The thing is, you did just mention something there, and this is my turn to get you back. You just said it's not that expensive.
Well,
and it's not that expensive
true.
In the context of most other motorsport activity, so on and so forth. But couple £100 is a lot of money, particularly for the people that we're generally talking about, because let's be honest here, people with lots of money are very, very capable of being dickheads at events. They are. It's just that it tends not to be in car parks at 10:30 at night. It tends to be in a slightly different way. And let's be honest here, much of the behaviour that you see on things like the Gumball and other such events, if you saw somebody just doing that around town, you would think they're an utter and total idiot. But because it's sort of within the context of this larger event, you get crowds forming to come and see them and cheer them and everything else. And I'm sure that a lot of the people that are inspired by that are also the people that then, come and do this sort of thing. And I would just like to see more accessible spaces to come and do this sort of thing. I think that's how it's become so problematic. Is it's the doing something inappropriate in the wrong place and at the wrong time. And if I were a young person, I was like, I want to just go out and just have a bit of fun in my car. Like, where would I do that? I don't even know.
This was always the problem I had. Like if I wanted to go have a little bit of fun, perhaps with something a little bit rear wheel drive over the years, I had to kind of maybe go and find a quiet area with some kind of like, something where it's appropriate, where it's not near anything and where it's safe to do so. And that's very seldomly found. It's just, they're just not about. So most of the time when I went out to go and have a little bit of fun and maybe see if I could kick my tail out, I ended up coming home and going, there's nowhere appropriate that I could find on this drive. It just wasn't the safe thing to do.
Yeah, and actually, going to your point, I hate the idea of seeming like I'm out of touch because, you know my past. I've been about as poor as you can get in the UK. Not much poorer than homeless, really, than you can generally get. Right. And as I've been there, I don't want to be out of touch. And there was somebody that spoke to me once and said that, what they do is they actually have a spare set of wheels that they put cheap tyres on. Mm-hmm. They swap the wheels over, go out and do this stuff. And because the tyres were like, I think all in 50 quid, they don't mind going through that 50 quid's worth of tyres in the weekend. And then they put their nice proper tyres back on at the end of the weekend for actually driving the car around. So I suppose if it's a choice between 50 quid and getting a weekend's worth of burnouts and sideways action illegally, and 250 quid if you want to actually, do you know what, I drift what you brung, they used to be cheap, the one at Santapod, and they used to have one at Rockingham. Obviously that's not there anymore. I remember back in the day you could do that like dirt cheap, like 50 to 75 quid or something crazy like that. Obviously still have tyres to go through. Yeah,
that's your big cost. See, there's a local entertainment complex, every single town has got one, and almost without fail, even on a sort of Friday night or so, there's a large portion of the car park that is just unused. And it's now got to the point where they'll actually barrier it off, I think, to stop people going in there and doing exactly this sort of stuff.
Yep. And speed bumps as well.
Yeah. I would just love to live in a world where of a Friday evening after 9 o'clock or so, when everybody else has basically gone home or they're in a restaurant or they're in the cinema or whatever, police can turn up and be like, look, yeah, congregate. Okay, we're going to set that section over there aside for you and go and be an idiot in your car, but make sure you brought your spare set of wheels so that when you leave the event, you're still legal. Like, please don't turn up in a 316i compact that just so happens to have a 325 engine in the front of it you've sort of forgotten to declare, because that's the other side of it, isn't it? And that's the thing, I think the thing that everybody can agree on is that you don't want anybody out there driving around effectively uninsured, because even without intending for something to happen, they can cause an accident and then you wind up not being covered. But if it's done right and people are encouraged that, look, there is a way you can have fun and there is a way that you can do stuff and it isn't going to cost you silly money, but you just have to be the right side of respectful, I think that would be a far, far more proactive approach. But unfortunately, it requires a little bit of understanding and tolerance, which this hobby just doesn't bring with it.
This is another thing, actually, you mentioned that grinds my gears. Unsafe and undeclared mods. I don't know if it's as common now, but I certainly know, maybe it's because I was young at the time and a lot of other people I knew were young. They couldn't obviously afford to insure the 325, compact or 5 Series, 3 Series, whatever, XYZ, and they'd get the small engine one and they would drop them in. I actually do know of a chap who had a Vauxhall Astra that was then converted locally, and somebody I knew who was doing it actually stopped the conversion and told them to sort it out themselves because they knew he wasn't going to declare it. And he was saying, I'm not going to declare it to the insurance or the tax. I don't need to. And subsequently, several months later, they sadly passed away in a car accident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this is the thing that happened. This was about 12 years ago now, but that person, is still meant a lot to people and still means a lot to people now that I see. And it could have been avoided if maybe they'd been a bit more sensible.
I mean, maybe it's because my car was my work transportation. So I always needed it to work, which meant that I didn't modify a car until I was, basically in my 30s. Yeah, because I needed it to be as standard as it could, because I wanted it to be as reliable as it could be. I wanted my insurance to be as cheap as it could be. I was also the sort of person, as a bit of a stickler for the rules, in that I once went to a rally event with a friend of mine, and for a laugh, I put some stickers on the side of the car and I phoned the insurance company up and declared them. Now, it only cost me the admin fee, I think, it was like 15 quid or whatever, because it was just quote unquote exterior decorative modification, so I could have probably put nearly anything on the car, and they didn't care. But I wanted to make sure that I was doing it right. It probably does mean more to me than maybe others, because having lost somebody in a road traffic incident, you always think about what could happen if you were to go out there and the unthinkable happens, and it doesn't need to be your fault. That's the thing I think that always gets me the most, is somebody doesn't have to have done something actively wrong. You don't need to have been going down the road at 150 mile an hour or this, that and the other. Like, maybe you just made an innocent mistake, something went wrong, but insurance companies are professional bastards and they will use anything and everything in their power to try and weasel out of paying, even in scenarios when maybe they probably should have.
2 words very quickly: undeclared remaps.
Yeah, see, undeclared remaps is a bit of a curious one, because I would wager, particularly with stuff, say, like your Golf, there are probably a lot of people out there driving cars around entirely unaware that the thing has been remapped.
Yeah.
I found it amusing years and years ago when I bought my Subaru. This is before I had my trade policy. Now, my trade policy is great because all I do when I buy a car is I just go on the motor insurance database website and I just put in the reg number and it's insured. It's great. It's also ruinous because it's why I've got so many cars now. But back in the day before I had that, I bought my Subaru. Now, I was already in my late 20s by the time I got this. I'd already had plenty of experience with other, much more valuable, much faster cars. So I thought, look, it's a Subaru. Nobody's really bought a Subaru to be the fastest thing around for at least 10 years at that point. It won't be that bad to insure. So I phoned them up, said, yeah, cool, I've got this car. Yeah, what is it? Subaru Impreza. Okay, cool. Any modifications? Yeah. What's it got? I said, well, it's got different alloys on it. They are Subaru alloys, just off a different Subaru. Okay, yeah, fine. All right, it's got a different wing on it as well. It's got the big wing on it because it's a Subaru. It should have a big wing on the back as far as I'm concerned. But it's a genuine Subaru part, again, just from a different car. Okay, yeah, that's fine. And it's got a different suspension on it as well. Again, it's just from the STI. This was the WRX. They said, yeah, that's cool. That's fine, no problem. And I said, oh, yeah, there's a aftermarket head unit in it as well. Yeah, cool, no problem. I said, oh, and there's a bigger turbo as well. But also, again, off the model above. And they said, yeah, no, absolutely fine. Yeah, it's no problem at all. I said, oh, and it's got a remap. And they went, ooh, does it? I'm like, yeah. After all that stuff I've just told you, why are you surprised about the remap? And of course, the thing is, it had a quote-unquote roadmap.
Yeah.
So I genuinely had no idea how much power it was actually making. So I just gave them the number that the previous owner had given me, which I think was about 300 horsepower or so, which seemed very plausible. And there was a difference as well between maps that give you up to 5%, maps that give you 5 to 15% more power than standard, and maps that give you more than 15% more power. And it's really? And yeah, that doubled the cost of the insurance.
Yeah.
So evidently someone somewhere has decided that the cars that are mapped are, the ones that they need to look out for. But yeah.
Yeah. So on that topic, going back to the engine swaps on the compact BMW from the 316 or 318 to the 325s. I think a lot of people forget that, it's not just a bigger engine in the same car. There are often changes and differences to things like the suspension, the brakes. The bigger the engine, the more likely there is to have some changes, or the bigger difference in engine size, the more likely there is to be differences. I mean, simply the weight of the engine in the front of the car sits the car at a certain ride height. If the
50% more engine,
it's going to push the front down because the springs are rated for that weight of engine, not that other weight of engine.
I'm not sure any of these cars are still on standard springs, though, to be honest.
That's true. That's true. But then the other thing is just worth mentioning is there's a misconception about insurance, which I think is to the convenience of the insurance companies more than anything else. And that is that if you have undeclared mods, then you're not insured. And that's not true. And I checked this with the Financial Services Authority just because somebody that I knew was in a situation where they did have a mod that wasn't declared because they weren't aware of it. And it turns out that if, let's say, your car is stolen, right, and it's recovered later, but it's a write-off because it's been, joyride or whatever, and they find that there's a mod on that car that wasn't declared, then they can only refuse your insurance if they would never have insured you in the first place with that. However, if they would quote you for an insurance policy, then the only thing they can do is reduce the payout by an equivalent percentage of the difference in premiums. So if you, if it was £1,000 premium for the year based on what you declared, and it would have been £1,500, had you not declared it, they can reduce the payout by 33%, but they can't refuse to insure you. And that's only for your car, not for the third party. So if there's any third party claim against it, they still have to honour that.
Although well worth pointing out, because there's been quite the rise in temporary insurance cover websites, you have to read the small print on those very carefully, because quite a few of them will have they'll all have a page of declarations, and often in there will be a little line saying car is not modified.
Yeah.
Yep.
And again, for those, if you've got even a small mod, then you may be driving entirely uninsured.
So that's the issue, because they would refuse the insurance.
Yep.
if it's modified. Therefore, you're not covered if it is modified.
Yeah.
Whereas if they would just charge you more for the premium, like many insurers would, then they can only reduce the payout proportionate to it. Now, many insurers will say, yeah, but in our terms and conditions, it says that, if you haven't declared anything, you're not covered. But the FSA doesn't really care about their terms and conditions because the law supersedes it. And what will happen is the insurance bod on the end of the phone, who's probably someone barely on minimum wage and maybe a bit more, who is given targets of insurance claims to refuse, that person will just not know any better, and they'll just say, I'm sorry, but you're not insured. And at that point, you'll then have to go to the FSA. I know somebody, I won't go into their specific case because I don't know if they've spoken about it publicly, but their vehicle caught on fire off the back of a repair that had been done under warranty from a dealer. It was not a main dealer, it was an independent dealer who'd paid an independent garage to do the work, and eventually their car caught fire. It was a write-off, and his insurance company just said, it wasn't, we're not covering it because it was somebody else's fault. And he's like, no, my insurance was you. If it's someone else's fault, you claim it off of them. I went, nope, not doing it. And then he tried to go to the dealer, and the dealer said, well, I didn't do it, they did it. And then he went to them and he says, well, you didn't pay me, so you're not my customer, I'm not liable to you. So in the end, I actually phoned the FSA and told them the story. I said, well, what can you do? And so the Financial Services Ombudsman, so check that out if you ever have these issues. And they just said, just tell them to give us a call, we'll tell him what information to send us. And it took 6 months to resolve, but he got a full payout from the insurance in the end.
Yeah.
And there were undeclared mods as well. That was the other issue. Sorry, that was the point I was trying to make. So the insurance company were using excuses to try and avoid the claim. Yeah. Like, it wasn't.
Moral of the story, don't give them the rope to hang you with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There was a similar, much larger scale thing like this not too long ago where I believe it was a Jaguar Land Rover dealership flooded. And there were hundreds of cars there, and they basically were all destroyed. And the dealer phoned the owners and said, really sorry, your car's just been destroyed. You're going to have to claim it off your insurance. And of course, all the owners went, why? They said, well, yeah, because flood damage, you got to claim it for insurance. They said, well, yeah, but the cars were in your care. And critically, the cars were in a place where the dealer had put them. So the last person to move it was the dealership. The dealership, of course, has its own insurance policy, and the dealership was aware that this adverse weather was coming. So the dealership had an opportunity to solve the problem or try and do their best to avert it, did nothing, all the cars got destroyed. And I think after the first few people, went to take them to court, they then realised, yeah, okay, we're going to claim off our own policy on this because, why should somebody have to claim on their own insurance for this? They shouldn't.
Very true. But look, it was my fault for going off track there.
That's all right.
Car enthusiasts, own worst enemy. I wonder if there's like a different angle on this as well, because I think there's not just, these events at car meets and the like, which I think, in theory should be fine, but because of certain individuals misbehaving, usually a very small percentage of the group there.
Always. It's always that, typically very, very vocal and difficult small number of people that make life difficult for the rest of them. And this is not at all unique to the car community, because I know Ant and I in particular have spoken so many times about football and the poor reputation. I mean, people forget this, but for a very, very long time, British fans were effectively banned from attending a lot of international football matches because their reputation was so poor. I mean, they were basically gangs of travelling thugs out to cause chaos under the guise of football. I mean, it's the old joke, they went to a fight and a football match broke out, and
took me a second to process that.
But it was, though, and yet somehow football sort of tried to clean up its image and this, that, and the other. But I think it's because football is a far, far more accepted part of society You know, it's it's much bigger business, I think, for a lot of people. It's much more important to people. I think people are more interested in whether their team's done well at the weekend as opposed to whether, Williams have gotten onto the podium yet in the Formula One. And I think also that's another thing that I think is kind of important and will be the topic of a future installment of the Radiator Arms, is that motorsport itself also has, I think, quite a big problem, in which motorsport has always been very, very elitist and exclusionary. Just even if it doesn't try, right, motorsport will always be exclusive, and it will always be near impossible to get into it with any degree of success if you want to treat it as anything other than just a bit of fun. Right, if you want to actually take it seriously, it is a way to get rid of however much money it is that you have.
There's a saying, if you want to make a small fortune in motorsport, start with a large one.
Yeah. And but the actual sport itself now is becoming a little bit harder to see, hard to go to. And again, this is another sort of social thing. Like, we need to give people more automotive themed social events to go to. Car shows, by which I mean, like, the big show at the NEC, or historically, the Geneva Motor Show. The way that we consume media has changed. The way that we learn about things has changed. There is now less need to go to physical places if you want to get information. There are fewer reasons for people to congregate together. And I think it's actually, I mean this legitimately, for the good of society as a whole, I think it's really important that we start giving people more reasons to get together and start interacting in person.
Well, you know what? I actually think things like Instagram and obviously YouTubers in the automotive space have been actually quite good for getting people together with their cars and in safe spaces. Obviously, the one that comes to mind is obviously the Auto Alex's Shed Fest. I know the year before there was a bit of problems with it, but I think this year it went really quite smoothly as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, I wasn't able to get to it, unfortunately. I was sequestered into some birthday shenanigans with our good friend Ben the Sparkle, which I enjoyed. But I will try and get to the next Shedfest if I can. I'm going to be going to Rustival. The Silverstone Festival, actually, I should give a bit of a shout out to. I don't like the fact they've jacked up all the prices since Silverstone themselves took over the running of it. But in concept, I really like what they're doing, because you've got a car show, you've got people bringing their cars, you've also got manufacturers showing off stuff as well. There'll often be motorsport display as well. There's stuff happening on the track too. And you've also, there's racing as well as demonstrations and this, that, and the other. And then you've got music in the evening, live music. So it's actually a bit of something for everybody. And that's an event that I really like.
Well, it's one of those, like you yourself, with the help of us and kind of things, have organised some little car meets, at the pub we quite regularly go to, and a few other little things like that, which you put out on the community page, and they've been lovely and they've been great.
Yeah.
You see people on Instagram putting things together. There's just a lot of people may think that kind of safe places to meet for car enthusiasts are dying. And if a lot of these laws that you're talking about actually come in and don't get sorted out, then perhaps, but at least in the interim, there are a group of people who are dedicated to having a nice time out there with friends and family and other people like that I think exist. You just have to look, what people like Ben, Dad Cars, does a lot of the meets he puts on. He has the child-friendly section. Like, if anything says to me that, this is a group of people that are passionate and you're going to get the right kind of car enthusiast, it's things like that. I would be at all of these rather than anything in a Halfords or a KFC car park, personally.
Yeah, but just for some context, I think I mentioned this earlier about the percentage. Another friend of mine had developed a regular car meet that, again, was lovely. There was no problems ever. They made it clear from a policy point of view that if you show up and you misbehave, your registration will be reported to the police. And there is a zero tolerance policy. That's what they would do. And I don't think they ever did, but that's not the point. The fact that they might was generally enough deterrent. And of course it would be filmed and they'd be more than happy to pass that on. This event grew from a few hundred cars to, I think they had something like 600 cars at one point. So they managed to negotiate with a particular racecourse in Surrey to be able to use the space there. And it was a monthly meet. And they thought, oh, well, 600 cars will fit, no problem. They got 2,000 spaces. Place was packed out. And before you knew it, there was a few cars at the end of the day doing burnouts and whatever as they were leaving. I counted about 10 cars out of 2,000 that were misbehaving. That's a tiny number. And I think this is what you tend to see at most of these, car park events. It's people rocking up, buying some fast food, walking around, looking at some cars. And then there's a tiny number of people out of maybe 200-300 cars. There might be 2 or 3 that misbehave. And that's why I kind of say I don't think we're our own worst enemy. I think that the enemy within are those few individuals that want to behave that way, and it's just.
But they've all got friends, right?
Yeah,
and those friends have a responsibility to tell that person not to be an idiot, because I guarantee you that every venue like that, which isn't used to hosting this sort of meet, it would have probably only got approved by the skin of its teeth anyway. And they'll have a whole bunch of people been telling them, oh no, they're going to wreck the grass, the place will be destroyed, it'll be filled with KFC wrappers, it'll be like we've hosted the Super Bowl the day before, like, oh, I don't know, I think this isn't a good idea. And they see one person being a dick on the grass, and they'll be like, yep, I knew it, told you so, right, they're never coming back again. So every single person has a responsibility to themselves and to the group. Like, it's the same. I see it as if like you're driving somebody else's, vehicle. You're like, if you're driving a work van, right? If I was ever borrow one of my dad's vans, you're like, you drive the work van, you are responsible. You are the demonstration to everybody else of that company. And the same thing, you go and attend an event, particularly a small scale one like this, which in the grand scheme of things is small scale, right? Yeah, we're not talking about like the Royal Ascot or something like that, okay? It's a relatively small event, and you are responsible because you are representing that event in the eyes of all of the people that aren't there. In the eyes, because let's face it, us car people, if you're not into cars, we do all look the same. So one angry NIMBY pensioner that lives next door to this venue sees one car doing something, is likely going to exaggerate the story quite a bit as well. And this is why I quite liked when I did go to some meets as a younger man. One of the best ones was in Cambridge, and they would always have the police there, which worked brilliantly because it meant that most of the time what they did was they would have a chat with people who maybe had forgotten to declare a couple of their modifications, and so long as the car was safe for the road, generally, I think what happened is they were told, right, you are going to go to phone your insurance company tomorrow, aren't you? But yes, because we will check.
Or you are going to put a number plate on the front of your car, aren't you?
Yes, it hasn't fallen off, has it? We're not stupid. Come on now. Like, we will not treat you like an idiot if you don't treat us like an idiot. Like, come on. But it actually worked really well, because also what happened is, on account of the fact there was a police presence already there, when they would get a phone call from the local angry pensioner going, they're racing up and down the car park, they'd go, no, they're not.
Yeah.
No, they're not. We know they're not. Like, come on. I mean, I got told once, I was up at a racetrack, and they would get a phone call from this bloke all the time complaining, whinging, whining about noise. He is the sort of person that has made it very, very difficult for you to have a racetrack anywhere, right? And it always fascinates me because at this point in time, the vast majority of these tracks have been there much longer than any of the people that live near the things.
Yeah.
Right? They got a phone call from this chap saying, you're racing, you're making too much noise, I'm going to report you to the council. And they went, no, it's not us. Yes, it is. I can hear it from my house. You're making such a racket. I'll complain. You're not supposed to do this. And he said, it's not us, sir. I can assure you. He said, yes, it blooming is. I know it is. And he said, no, it's not. He said, well, what makes you so sure? He said, well, there's not an event on today. And he said, well, in our calendar, it says there is. And he's like, yeah, but it got cancelled. So the bloke was phoning up just to complain about an event that wasn't actually even happening. And that's what people do.
Now, see, a part of me says, right, well, fair enough. In fact, all of me says, yes, as our friends, we would like to speak to people and say, look, that's not a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, I agree with that. But a part of me is a bit frustrated by this idea that, well, we need to just be mindful of, how people might see us and how they're going to interpret whether a racetrack is or is not responsible. Because I've experienced something like that in my life, where because of the actions of one other person that happens to share one characteristic with me, that now I'm being judged. Right? And I'm sure the people watching will know what I'm talking about. And if you've only ever listened, then I happen to have black heritage. And there have been many times where I've been walking down the street. The funniest time ever, actually, I was walking down the street and I walked past an elderly couple and I felt this whack on the back of my head. And I turned around, I was like, what was that? He was like, "You're not robbing me." I'm like, "What?"
They're like, "You're right, I'm not robbing you."
What? Yeah, no, I'm not joking. I was 17 years old. I remember this very well. And it is in Rose Hill near Merton. And I was walking from one bus stop to the next bus stop to get get home, actually. I was living South London at the time. And literally, we were on the pavement. And there was like space for 4 people to walk past. They were being quite slow, but there was space to walk past them to the right. She was on the right, he was on the left. I walked past them, got a whack on the back of the head from her handbag. And he puts his dukes up, good old-fashioned 1950s boxing style, and says, he says, "Oh, I've been a boxer, you know, I've been a boxer." I was like, "That's nice." Like, but she just assaulted me. I literally walked past you. "We know what you're up to. You're trying to steal from us." And I'm like, "All right then." And I walked off, right? So it's like, you know, maybe one time a person robbed them and happened to share a similar skin color to me. And now everybody who's different to them, who looks more like that one person, is suddenly out to rob them. And, you know, I've experienced this a million times in my life. I mean, I've sat down with everybody. I've been pulled over, stopped and questioned, matched the description, arrested a couple of times. My worst crime was standing at a bus stop, because that meant I must be doing graffiti on buses, by the way. You know, I've had that experience in my life. And so for me, this is a slightly sensitive issue, because when I start seeing that same type of prejudice being applied to car people, it pisses me off, because excuse my language, but I can relate to that, where you can be in a modified car and people just assume, well, you must have been the one making the noise.
Actually, this did apply. I don't think it really does so much anymore, but this did apply to a very large group of motorists, which is motorcyclists.
Yep.
Because for a very, very long time, they enjoyed, and you could argue, a reputation that was earned by a great number of them, of basically being antisocial, dishonest, basically the, mobile thugs of the road. I remember my dad telling me a story of when he was probably a similar age to you were, as a teenager. He was a dispatch rider, so effectively a motorbike courier. And he was riding down the road, and some old people in a Ford Capri pulled out in front of him. He went over the top of the car, and not to put it too graphically, but his wrist went 180 degrees the wrong way.
Ow.
So basically went over, got caught, and it went all the way around. And even in his 60s, you can see the scar from where the bone sort of came out. Ugh. And the ambulance attended, got the old people out of the car and walked them into the ambulance, looked at my dad, who was sat in the road with his wrist flapping around, and said, "You get in."
Yep.
Because they just assumed that him being the motorcyclist, he was at fault.
Yep.
In the 1990s, when my grandfather was killed by a doddery old person that pulled out in front of him, not looking, recently had to clear out my nan's house, and I found the inquest from Granddad's accident, and I read through it. That taught me some interesting things. There are about 12 different people interviewed about what happened on the day. Very, very simple thing. Motorcycle riding along. It was one of these horrible bits of dual carriageway where you can actually drive across the dual carriageway. Anyway, the chap had decided that he didn't want to be going that direction of the dual carriageway. He wanted to be going the other direction. So he pulled off to the side and then basically did a sort of, right-hand turn without looking. And then basically, predictable happened. When they went to take him to court for, wrongful death and so on and so forth, because my grandmother lost not only her partner, but also her employer. So this was quite a big thing for her. I found one of the letters saying that there is a good chance we might just get a judge that doesn't like bikers. And even though the police report has stated it was 100% not his fault, the judge still might not see it that way. And we even had, of these 12 people that were interviewed about what happened, they'd all seen it, including one off-duty officer who actually knew my grandfather. He didn't realise till they took his helmet off who it was that was involved. They all got asked what speed they thought he was doing, and basically all of them said about 70, which was the speed limit for that piece of road at the time. One of them said 100 mile an hour.
Mm-hmm.
You know, of 12 people, one of them go 100 mile an hour. You're like, yeah, because there's a motorcycle's gone past you. It's got 100 mile an hour. You're like, imagine if they were the only person that had seen it that day.
Oh,
know?
mate. And I've seen this. Like, well, actually, there's a study, I think it was from Australia, where they actually did a study about perceived speed. And the louder a vehicle is, the faster it seems to be going to people from the outside and from the inside, for that matter. And I've been in situations where I've been driving down the road and 25 miles an hour in a 30, and someone's like, slow down. And I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
like, what am I supposed to do?
I had this the other day, actually, and I was in the Gulf of all things, and it's not even noisy. There was a bunch of ramblers kind of walking one way on a country road, and this is from where a 60 has gone down into a 40. And I've seen like this group of 20 old people, and I'm now on the right-hand side of the road. I have slowed down to 30 or under, and still an old man is shaking his fist at me going, slow down.
Yeah.
And I just looked at him and went, what? And then he started sticking his fingers up at me. And I'm thinking, but I have slowed down.
He would almost certainly be the same person that drives at 40 mile an hour past a school at chucking out time as well, won't he?
Absolutely.
In his micro, in second gear.
Absolutely.
But you know why that is? It's that Bora front end. It makes it look so fast.
It's exactly what it
Race
is.
car, bro.
That is.
So I've had an idea, right? Now, there is a problem when it comes to issues like this, which is that the ideal solution is very rarely the one that is actually ever going to be implemented or might ever work, you know, because it's just so massively complicated, difficult, and everything else. And I think a large part of what we're talking about in many cases is a social thing as well. Personally, I'm actually a little bit worried about these sort of little car park midnight gatherings becoming an extinct breed, because buying cars at low prices that young people are proud of is now becoming very, very difficult. Like, you can't get a £500 MR2 anymore. If you could, it's not going to get a whole one. You know, so I made a big point recently, and in fact, it's one of the things I talked about when I took your Maestro out the other day, that look, yeah, that's the sort of car where, you know, that's the reason that car is so miraculous is when that was laid up in a barn, it was probably worth a few £100. You know, in the early 2000s, an old Maestro, like, yeah, Clubman, what, 1.3? He's not even a whole 1.3, it's 1275, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, so that's worth nearly nothing to anybody. But somehow it got kept. You know, in a lot of other circumstances, it might have just been weighed in for scrap. Or when the scrappage scheme came along, someone said, oh, actually, crikey, I've got this old Maestro that I've technically owned for the last 10 years. And now all of a sudden it's worth £2,000 for a new car. Yeah, cool, going to send it in. But it hasn't. But finding cars like that now at low prices, nearly impossible. And one of the things I said in the Maestro video is that I think it's really, really important that we, as the more senior, more established members of the car community, make sure to give those that are newer to it ways to get into things. You know, I've had people before be sort of very much talked down to because they wanted to bring their car to a classic meet. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to say who it was. It was our good friend Ben the Sparkle was going to come to a classic car meet with his Focus, and he's going to come with his Focus because that's the car that he happens to own. Now, I think that going to something like a classic car meet shouldn't require you to own a classic car to be a part of the group. In the same way that I'm a member of the Bloomin' TVR Owners Club. I've never owned a TVR in my life, but I've been to a few meets because I'm interested in the cars. I have an enthusiasm for the cars. Now, it just so happens his sodding Focus is 20 years old. And it is effectively the modern day equivalent of what, like an escort, I guess, or what would it be the equivalent of? Yeah, something like that, or a Capri or whatever. Yeah, an escort. Yeah. So you're like, if you said you had like a 1990s escort or something, they'd be more than happy to see you there. But just because it's the Focus, it's easy to forget. It's a 20-year-old car now. It's more or less eligible for classic car insurance. And to see people speak down to somebody because they've already made a judgment about you based on your car, that is wrong. That is prejudice in its most simple form. You know nothing about somebody other than one completely, visual thing. You know nothing about who they are, where they're from, what they like, anything like that. And you're making this usually misjudgment based on them. Instead, I think that the solution to this is the solution to an awful lot of problems in today's society, which is that a bit more effort should be done to be inclusive. And I don't know how this has happened, but somehow inclusive has been turned into a dirty word by certain members of society. And so I have decided to do my own small part in this and basically go on a bit of an inclusivity crusade and say that in terms of the car meet, I don't really care who you are, so long as you want to come to the meet with a bit of respect, don't arrive, in a sea of pops and bangs and, farting fire out the back of your car, and don't leave as if it's, the Fast and the Furious, right? Just, don't be a dick, as the sign at Caffeine and Machine goes, all right? All are welcome, right? All people will always be welcome to Radiator Arms meets. It doesn't matter if you had to walk to the blooming thing, right? That is, I know that we all agree with this. I know we don't have to ask each other about this, right? And I think that's really important because this gives people an outlet for their enthusiasm, an outlet for their passion. And if we can give people healthy outlets for this, then the whole thing will become a bit of a moot point. So if you are a car person, and you're into your cars or whatever, maybe a bit older, maybe you've got a Lamborghini, a Ferrari, or a classic Mercedes or whatever, it doesn't matter. If you see your local lads in a car park, at 10 o'clock at night, whatever, go and say hi.
Yeah.
Because almost without fail, they're lovely, right? They're nice people that are trying to enjoy their hobby and often a bit of KFC as well, poor mates. And they're decent, nice people. And very often, if I've got a nice car or whatever, they'll want to know about your car too, because maybe one day they'd like to own something like that as well. It's just at this point in time, they can't. And I think then maybe you go, and sometimes you go, oh, by the way, did you know this meet happens here or this meet happens here? Because a lot of these old, more established meetings are gate-kept, not deliberately, but simply by the fact that they're not advertised in the same way that a lot of young people find their meets. A lot of gatherings and things aren't advertised on Facebook. They're not on Instagram or social media, that sort of stuff. So I think it's really important to say to people like, hey, we do this, we go here, there's this car club, there's this thing you can join. Like, there's lots of places in which you will absolutely be welcome, can find kindred spirits. And if you're looking to do something, you're like, hey, where do I go drifting? Where do I go and do this, or this? They might go, hey, I'm going on a drift day next week. Why don't you come along? Like, come and do this. Or like, hey, there's an introductory price or something's going on. Like, do that and then, hopefully it'll be nice. But I think a lot of these people are out there doing these things because they've probably tried and looked, but they can't find any other outlet for their enthusiasm, for their passion. And I do feel pretty sorry for a lot of young people out there because it is a real struggle. I look at the stuff I was able to do when I was in my early 20s, and that's, quote unquote, only 15 years ago. And things have changed a lot. Like a huge amount. So I think anything that we can do as the sort of more established generation to give the next lot a bit of a leg up is a very, very good thing.
And one of those things, I think, is trying to address these court orders so that their intent in terms of the problem they're trying to solve and the fallout, or was it the collateral damage, is reduced as a result of the way that they're worded and structured. So if you happen to be a car enthusiast and a solicitor / lawyer in the UK, please get in touch with us because we'd love to speak to you about maybe how we could
stick it to the man.
That's one way of putting it, but help solve this problem so that, yes, the problematic behaviours can be policed and ruled out. But the non-problematic behaviours, the positive behaviours where there's communities that come together, where they're not all getting drunk on a Friday night, but instead are parked in a car park outside a pub, spending money into the economy, both in terms of car parts and buying food and
Often doing charitable endeavours as well.
often charity events as well. We don't want to lose all of that. So if you happen to be a lawyer or solicitor, please get in touch.
Yeah.
And what is that email address again, James?
It's landlord@theradiatorarms.com. Indeed, if you want to message us about just about anything, we would love to hear from you. And as ever, don't forget to tune in on a Monday morning at 7 o'clock. We'll be waiting for you and your morning commute here first on YouTube and then a week later on Amazon, Apple, Spotify, and other potential corners of the dark web. So from us, we wish to say simply a big thank you, and we'll see you next time here at the Radiator Arms.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Lunch.
Lunch.
Breakfast.